Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we are going to share werewolf horror stories. First story, Halloween with a werewolf. I live in a small village in rural England. It's a sleepy little place, but for all that it has quite a rich history. There's an old castle some ways away that was owned by a feudal lord in the Middle Ages, and legends about the castle and the surrounding countryside about. My favorite legend is the one about the Lord and his illicit lady lovers. It's a great story of guilt, revenge, and adventure, and I don't believe a word of it. My friend Sam, on the other hand, his favorite story is the one about the wolf. Legend has it that over 300 years ago, the Lord's eldest son was out hunting when he was set upon by a monstrous hound. It knocked the boy from his horse, crippling him on impact, and then fled into the woods. The Lord's men who had been accompanying the boy had chased after it, with just one man staying behind to guard the lad. When the Lord's men returned to the spot where the accident took place, having failed to locate the wolf, there was no one there. Neither lad nor soldier, just a trail of blood and signs of a struggle. The young man was never seen again after that point. But ever since, there have been rumors and whispers of a midnight black wolf that haunts the full moons of our quaint little countryside. It's just a story, but Sam, he believes it. He loves the story, and he loves the imagery of the wolf. One Halloween, Sam decided to dress up as the wolf from the legend. He was really excited because this Halloween was actually going to occur on a full moon as well. Now I know what you're thinking. Clearly this story will end up with me mistaking the real werewolf for Sam in his costume at some point. How cliché. Let me assure you that that did not happen. It couldn't have. Sam's costume was good, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't good enough to mistake for the werewolf from the story. It wasn't bulky enough, and the mask, which was really just a motorcycle helmet with lots of cardboard and fake fur all over it, wasn't expressive or lively enough for that. The rest of his costume was alright, I guess. He had gotten a lot of dark clothing and covered every part of it in fake fur. Honestly, he really had gone to a lot of effort with the whole thing. What really impressed me was the attention to detail he had used. The cardboard teeth had little droplets of blood painted onto them. He had a tail made from a wire brush that he'd made look pretty authentic, and he walked around in a hunched manner, like he was some bizarre Lupin homunculus, struggling with the beast that lay within him. It was obvious that it was a costume, but you had to hand it to him. The costume did look like a werewolf ought to look. It sort of put me off my lunch, to be honest. I mean, it really is quite weird when you eat someone who looks so much like yourself. Second story. My grandpa and his friends hunted down a werewolf in the 1960s. So, my grandpa was a normal teenager from the farm. He never did a lot in his teens and was a very average dude. He had a lot of friends tough, from mixed ages. The story begins with him coming back from wandering around with his 5 close friends at the time. They agreed beforehand to go to one of the friends' house and test a new farm tool that the description was very vague. It was something that people used to cut meat at the time. My mom says that she thinks was a Bosch machete in German, but could have been just a normal knife/axe. They were going there until they saw some angry farmers yelling at each other in the middle of the road. My grandpa and his friends approach asking what happened, and one of the farmers says, "This idiot killed my chickens." The other one turns to the guy and says, "Fuck you. I did not. My chickens were killed too." To be very specific, those were metropolitan farmers. They did recently move out from the rural area and brought some chickens and seeds to make their personal farms. It was relatively common at the time, and some still do those personal farms to this day. But since they were relatively new to the metropolitan area, the chickens weren't at the backyard and yes, at a poor fenced front yard. So, one of my grandpa's friends was a 25-ish-year-old adult. This guy had already traveled through the country, and was familiarized to this type of situation. He says to them to calm down, and then points at one of the few dead chickens that were lying around the front yard of one of the farmers. "None of you killed the chickens," he says. "They were killed by a dog." The farmers look at the chickens, and each of them sees the few carcasses that had left of those chickens had been bitten off large chunks of meat, and the bites did resemble the ones of a dog. The two realized that they were being idiots and apologized to each other. My grandpa and the rest of his friends were just watching the whole thing. "I have experience with this kind of stuff. If you want, I can hunt down the damn dog that did this to your chickens," says the 25-ish-year-old. The farmers look at each other and then look at him. "How much?" "How about 100? I will have to lay some traps and buy some meat so I can lure the hound." The farmers accept. The guy, after talking a little with the farmers, comes back to the group that was basically doing nothing. "Hey, you guys want to help me? We can use those 100 to buy some beer." Needless to say that the four teens were very excited with the idea. $100 at the time was a relatively big amount of money, so a lot of beer was coming. Anyway, they bought some meat, brought the material to make traps, and that knife/machete/axe that I mentioned before. What better test than to kill a hound? So, they assemble the traps and discuss plans to make it seem like it was a difficult job, so that the farmers don't back down the deal. They go to their homes and assemble at those guys' houses at about 23:30. They place the meat at the traps. They get into position and wait for about an hour and a half. Everyone was basically sleeping at this point. And then they see movement at some bushes nearby. Thinking that a normal dog was about to show up, the guys begin to get excited. They can kill the damn hound and go home finally. Guess what? Surprise. It's a 5 meters wolf-like beast that comes out of the bushes and roam around the traps, sniffing the air and grabbing the meat, casually destroying the traps that were too small for his size. Everyone was pretty much paralyzed and shitting their pants. The 25-ish guy was with a "oh fuck" expression. No one knew what to do. The wolf beast appears to notice one of the teens hiding. The thing gets closer and closer to where the guy was. It gets in all fours and makes a position typical of predators, laying low and preparing to jump at the kid. In a panic, one of the teens jumps of its cover, screaming and running over to the wolf thing. He is followed by the other two teens and the 25-ish guy. The beast was startled and gets up. My grandpa and his friends attack the wolf thing with their bare fists, virtually making no harm to the creature, while the same throws them away with its forearm and pure strength with one blow. The thing turns around to my grandpa, that was at this point thrown to the ground like he was a piece of paper. Basically, he weighed nothing to that creature that had just essentially made him and three friends of his fly to different directions. Out of the sudden, the wolf thing starts to scream and howl. It turns around to reveal a knife/machete/axe halfway deep into his back, desperately trying to reach it and take it off. In front of the creature was my grandpa's friend that was in cover a minute ago, fearing for his life. Needless to say that the wolf thing was more than pissed. It turns to my grandpa's friend growling, still with the knife/machete/axe in its back. My grandpa then runs over to the beast just to take that object off its back, then sink into his back again, making another deep wound and taking it out of its back again. The beast howls and throws my grandpa away another time. The thing gets in all fours and runs off. My grandpa and that 25-ish guy run to get that thing. Now they were pissed. My grandpa was armed with that knife/machete/axe, and the 25-ish guy was with a trunk or a pointy stick. So, those big wounds in its back made a trail of blood that my grandpa and his 25-ish friend followed all night. When they get to the wolf thing house, they find a guy naked with two large wounds in its back. The guy just stands there, looking into nothing in the middle of the room. The 25-ish guy takes a rope that was close to the door and laces the guy cowboy style. Then they drag the guy outside and tie him to a tree trunk. When outside, they realize that the entire night was spent hunting that guy. They pretty much knew about werewolves, but didn't know what to do now. They didn't have anything that would allegedly kill a werewolf. So my grandpa just goes and asks to one random guy to go get the police. The police arrives. My grandpa and his 25-ish friend told them what happened. The police shrugs and arrest my grandpa, his friend, and the allegedly werewolf for fighting. They didn't believe in one word that my grandpa and his friend saw yet. They do some interrogation. My grandpa stays in jail until evening. Then he and his friend get released. Apparently, the allegedly werewolf was wanted for the assassination of a guy in Sao Paulo. Anyway, they go back to the rest of the gang and tell what happened. They pretty much promised never to talk about it since nobody would believe them, and the treatment for craziness at the time was way harsh. That knife/machete/axe became legendary in that circle of friends, but it was lost due to time. No one ever found it or talked too much about it. In accordance to what my mom said, the knife/machete/axe fell in a lake or was thrown into a lake. Again, no one really knows for sure. My grandpa had 2 ribs broken and his elbow was cracked. The other guys pretty much were intact, except for the 25-ish guy that fell with his arm into a pointy rock and needed to get patched. The farmers didn't want to pay my grandpa and his friends, but the police gave them a reward of $350. Naturally, they spent it all in one night. Third story. I didn't believe in werewolves, but I spent years hunting one who wept. His face streaked with tears. He writhed in his seat. His legs stretched. Bare ankle appeared below his jeans. His shirt pulled loose, his back hunching, his head pressed to my car's roof. I saw claws, sharp and heavy, slide from beneath his fingernails. Underneath his face, the bones shifted shape. The brow rose and sloped. The lower jaw lengthened front and rear. Muscles bulged in his face, telling of terrible power in his bite. I'd been hunting for the so-called werewolf who killed my sister. Now he was in my passenger seat, and I had only seconds to decide what to do. One August evening 4 years ago, my sister, Ginger Ames, died at the Square Diner in Drunken Tree. The coroner ruled her death accidental. She fell on broken glass when people were running away in panic. Even if that was true, I still blamed the bastard who started the panic. The man who killed Ginger was described as about 5'10" to 6 foot. Wavy dark blonde hair loose to his shoulders, clean-shaven, brown eyes, no scars. 20 people there, but no photos. That's panic for you. Ordinary looking. Except when he was 7 feet tall and had claws he could sheathe like a cat's. That description's from the man who served his burger and fries. Just before he started crying, grew a foot taller, and started killing people. This fall, a man named Robert Suter was torn open in the parking lot of the same diner. His friend Carrie White said they'd been discussing Ginger's death. Suter had been a witness that night. Another man, Jacob Evers, had been with Carrie and Suter. She dated Evers several times. She introduced Evers to Suter. They all had dinner together, but she left before they did. Suter was found dead in the parking lot. Evers hasn't been seen since. Jacob Evers was described as 5'9" to 6 foot, hazel eyes, bald, full blonde beard. Ordinary looking, aside from the whiskers. Carrie White said he had no scars or tattoos anywhere she'd had opportunity to see. Police said the name is probably false. 4 years ago, right after Ginger's funeral, I met with Leanne Gross. Leanne had been Ginger's lover for about a year. A few months before Ginger was killed, they'd quietly split up, but they'd remained close friends and talked frequently. Now I learned that Leanne spoke to Ginger the night she was killed. She called me, asked if Travis had come by. They talked all the time, you know? I knew. Travis Mosley and Ginger had been best friends since Argenta Junior High, closer than siblings. Though I was a couple of years younger, he'd been my friend too, as much as anybody so bottled up could be. Travis was a stoic, never betraying hurt or anger. Though he had a warm grin, he only rarely showed excitement or affection. Only Ginger could open him up. All our parents expected them to get married. Then they both announced they were gay the same week. That had rattled me. I'd never had a gay friend before, didn't know how to take it. But when I saw how he stuck by Ginger during our parents' first angry, frightened reactions, I realized I owed him the same loyalty. He disappeared for a while, earlier that summer. When he reappeared, he claimed not to know where he'd been. Ginger was the only one who really believed him. Even his parents thought he was hiding something. I didn't know what to believe. I backed him because Ginger did. Now Leanne told me that Ginger and Travis had planned to meet at the Square Diner. Ginger had called Leanne because Travis was late and hadn't called her. Leanne said Ginger thought maybe he'd come by here to get her, not remembering we split up. I toyed with the idea that Travis was the werewolf. Travis was the right size and build, a bit under 6 feet and blonde. All the descriptions called the guy ordinary looking until he changed. And Travis was the complete guy next door. Ordinary as oatmeal, except for 2 stark scars on his chin and cheek from a bicycle wreck. I was ashamed for even considering him. Travis, crying in public? Laughable. And I absolutely couldn't believe he'd hurt Ginger. He'd have died first. Travis hadn't come to Ginger's funeral, though, a real shock. He'd holed up in his parents' house in Argenta, absolutely crushed by her death. I'd gone by to visit and found him sitting in a darkened bedroom. Though glad to see me, at first he'd hardly talk. When he did, his voice was flat. It's like a curse. First I lose a month, then I lose Ginger. Something happens to Mom and Dad. No way I could stand that. I'd just die. I'd never heard that much emotion from him. A week or 2 later, he took off, closed his apartment, stored his stuff, and left town. He called his parents every week or 2, but never told them where he was. He turned off friend tracking on his phone. I didn't see him for 4 years. About the time Travis left, I talked to the server in the diner. Only a few weeks after Ginger's funeral, Marcus Alderiggio's story was already well rehearsed. Aldo, said Ginger, and this blonde-haired fellow came in together. The man started crying. I thought she was giving him the Dear John, said Aldo. He started crying, then he changed. I was closer than anybody else, Aldo said, right across the counter. I could see tears dripping off his chin. I can tell you, he didn't sprout hair or big fangs, none of that, but his bones changed. When he stood up, he was over 7 foot, and he had claws like a cat that he could sheathe or pop out. A lady screamed, but the real panic didn't start until some working-class hero type tried to wrestle the Catman to the ground. He eviscerated the idiot. When guts hit the floor, the diner went crazy. Less than a minute later, Ginger was dying, her belly ripped by glass. She bled to death before paramedics arrived. The coroner found bruises on her back, from feet. Hating myself, I showed Aldo a photo of Travis on my phone. Small as the image was, he immediately picked out the facial scars. Same kind of face, real John Doe type, but this guy didn't have so much as an acne scar. Perfect skin. 2 days after Suter's murder, I talked again to Aldo. Before he'd say a word, I had to remind him I was Ginger's brother, and that we'd talked 4 years earlier. But he wasn't much help regarding Jacob Evers. I told the cops, I don't know if it's the same guy. I couldn't pick either one of them out of a decent lineup. They got that kind of face. Joe Average face. No scars, no tattoos, just that beard. I'd recognize this guy's voice again. Maybe we talked that much, but his face? Could be anybody. At least this time I could be sure it wasn't Travis, since Jacob had slept with Carrie White. Some small comfort. How do you find a werewolf? Or werewolf? The cops thought it was some sort of stunt, and were checking all of Ginger's acquaintances. They'd investigated Travis too, but I still felt guilty. In 4 years, while I was in college, they found no leads on the diner killer. Now, with Robert Suter, there'd been another killing. They wouldn't say whether they thought it was the same killer. But either way, they weren't looking for a shapeshifter with cat claws. I was. A shapeshifter who cried. My granddad used to say of someone, he was raised breathing drunken tree lake. He meant that people who move to the area don't have the same attitudes as people who grew up here. And people who grew up in town don't have the same attitudes as those who lived along the shore or in the hills. Things happen around here. Sometimes people make things happen. This fall, after wondering for 4 years about Ginger's death, I wanted to make something happen. I looked up a lady who'd been my grandmother's friend when I was little and asked her what she remembered about Ginger's death. If she blamed it on drugs, like the newspapers, I'd have visited a while and gone home. But she said, that was a terrible thing, and that creature's still around, somewhere. You heard he killed another man last week? When I told her what I wanted, she warned, some of those folks can be as dangerous as the thing that killed Ginger. You should keep your distance from them. I told her I had to find the cat man, whatever it took. You're fixing to do it anyway, she said finally, so I suppose I ought to steer you to the right people. Let me ask about, see who's still walking this earth. I left my number. A week later she called me. There's a man named Yuri White, lives on Grace Mountain, Jackson Road. He won't do anything, but he'll put you in touch. She read me a number. Yuri White, Jackson Road. Mr. White to you. He's uppish that way. Mr. White refused to talk on the phone or invite me to his home. I'll meet you at the old Second Baptist, downtown Argenta. You know it? Across from Guthrie Park? That's it. I'll be there at 3 to meet someone else. If you come, we'll talk. I'll have a black necktie. Guthrie Park is a square block on JFK. Crossing the park to Second Baptist Church, I spotted a broad-shouldered, bald guy with a blonde beard, maybe 40, leaning against a historic marker, gazing up at the church. I tensed, then relaxed. Since Suter was killed, I'd been clenching up at every bald, bearded blonde I saw. The little church had closed down, I discovered. A sign said it would soon be a neighborhood resource center. Inside, several young people in jeans and t-shirts worked at scrubbing and painting concrete block walls. The color of Mr. White's tie was irrelevant. Nobody else even had a collar. He was a tall, thin man, perhaps in his late 60s, with thick snow-white hair and a narrow mustache. I briefly told Ginger's story. I want to find him, I said. Landy said you knew people. Perhaps. Have you heard of the coterie? The what? No, sir. Good. You shouldn't have. And it would be good if no one heard of them from you. He smiled thinly. One of them is likely to have the required skill, and this sort of case often interests them. He stooped toward me. They will expect a substantial payment. Are you prepared to pay? I remembered standing by Ginger's grave, sweating in my best suit. If I can afford it, sir, I'll pay whatever it takes. The bearded guy still stood looking at the church. His eyes flicked to me as I came out, looked away, then came back more sharply. Rick, he said. The voice rang bells, but the face didn't.
Sorry.
He grinned, obviously unsurprised at my lack of recognition. Even with a beard, that grin was familiar and took 15 years off him. I looked at the tanned scalp, the whiskered jaw. Travis? Hey man, how you been? He'd grown thin since I'd last seen him. The broad shoulders only emphasized that. And that bare scalp. Cancer? But there was a robustness to him that belied that thought. Clean, I thought, then couldn't think why. Where the hell have you been? It just burst out. He'd been such a part of Ginger's life. Then he'd fallen off the earth. Before he answered, he walked right up and put his arms around me. I returned his embrace somewhat hesitantly and used to such display from him. He stepped back and looked me over. I've been kinda messed up, he said. I lost more in a month of my life, and I'm still hunting for it. You still don't know how? Jesus, your mom must have called Ginger 200 times while you were missing, asking had she heard from you. Where have you been since? Around. You'd seen me, but I hear you went to Texas A&M. He punched me on the shoulder. Traitor. I had to get away. After Ginger, I couldn't stay home. Compared to Arkansas, Texas is like a foreign goddamn country. Yeah, Ginger messed me up, too. I spent so much time trying to find out what happened to her. Me too, whenever I came home. You believe in this werewolf shit? Not one goddamn bit. His jaw clenched. I believe in plain old human fuckery. That's more than enough. Listen, I've got to get to the bank. Are you at your mom's house? We should talk, compare notes. Maybe between us we've got all the pieces. He cocked his head. You mean you've actually found out something? I must have talked to 100 people who said they were there that night, and not more than 10 of them were for real. I think I've got a lead, at least. But I really have to get across town. You carry a phone, right? I sent him a text, so we had each other's numbers. I was in line at the bank when my phone rang. $2,000, Mr. White told me. $500 in advance for our expenses. $1,500 if and when we find him. If we can't, we don't bill you. I whistled softly. That's a lot. This requires more than a Craigslist ad, Mr. Ames. Our techniques can be dangerous, even when we aren't seeking a known killer. Earlier he'd said they, not we. How fast do you need the 5? Please have it by this evening. Somebody will come for it. She'll call herself Kite. Free spirit, huh? No, Mr. Ames. A very efficient hunter. She couldn't have been 16 yet, skinny and coltish, but she scared me. When I opened my door, she stood on my porch, twitching like an open switchblade. The sunset flamed against her strawberry blonde hair. I'm Kite. I'd have sooner invited a hooded cobra into my apartment, but she slipped in before I could protest. I had the urge to check my ribs for slashes. I gave her a $500 cashier's check, and she gave me a receipt. We'll keep Mr. White informed. When she was gone, I drew a deep breath and felt myself shuddering. Our techniques can be dangerous, Mr. White had said. She was scary as hell, but seemed like she'd be fast and efficient. I had no idea how fast things were about to move. In 2 hours, I'd know nearly everything. 15 minutes after Kite left, someone knocked. My heart pounding, fearful she'd returned. I opened the door. Travis stood there. The sunset had already faded. Thin, hairless, his beard grayed in the twilight. He looked like the ghost of Travis yet to come. Hey man, he said softly. Your mom told me where you live. This a good time to talk? Yeah, sure. Come on in. Don't like talking inside. How about we go for a drive around the lake? I started to protest, but something in his face stopped me. There was a look of tremendous calm, even peace about him. But it was the peace of someone who has swallowed an enormous pain, certain of his capacity to absorb it. "Yeah, sure," I said again. "Let me go pee and grab a drink." Driving north through the Marina District, we exchanged news about our families. Our parents, his grandfather, my older brother Gary in Atlanta. Not until we hit the quiet, dark, tree-flanked roads of Grace Mountain did our talk turn to Ginger. I summarized what I'd learned over the years, though I didn't admit showing his photo to Aldo. He listened intently, without commenting. At the end he said, "Well, it's too bad. But you ain't got anything I didn't already have." But he didn't seem disappointed. In fact, he seemed almost relieved. I asked him what he knew that I didn't. "I don't know," he said. "I don't know if you're ready to hear some of it." "What?" "Travis, that's not fair. She's my sister." But I watched his face close, growing distant. I realized something. Travis had been trying to open up with me as he had with Ginger. But I wasn't Ginger, and in the end he couldn't trust me that far. It hurt, but I resolved not to show it. So I realized something about myself. I was trying to be like Travis, stoic and strong. Before he came out, I'd have never guessed that a gay man would one day be my role model for tough. And a final revelation. 4 years at A&M hadn't taught me anything about dealing with death. Though older than Ginger had been when she died, I was still a kid, asking the grown-ups for help. We were winding down Grace Mountain Road, less than a minute from the center of Drunken Tree. To circle the lake, we'd turn east toward Shore Road, right past the Square Diner. I'd been by it often, small as Drunken Tree is. To avoid the diner, you'd have to avoid the whole town. But tonight Ginger's memories were strong. I signaled a right turn, my grip painfully tight on the wheel. There in the bright lights, people sat eating supper. "Well, if you won't help me," I said, "somebody else will. I've been talking to people. They think they can find the guy with the claws." I stopped, embarrassed to say more. "Who the hell told you that?" "Don't snap it, sorry. I just feel so damn silly saying it. They're witches. You know the stories around here. Witchcraft, covens up in the hills. They can find things cops can't." He sucked in sharply. "You were at the church. Who was it?" "People called the coterie. They say they can help." "Oh, Christ, Rick, are you crazy? They're dangerous. How the hell did you even hear of the coterie?" I asked around. Old folks. You know the people I could ask. The village fell behind us. From here to the dam, Shore Road was woodland and houses on large private tracts, with a few shoreside developments. The old money lived here, north of the lake. "Oh, Jesus, you don't know who you're messing with. Did any of them give you a name?" "A girl named Kite. Just a kid." "Oh shit, oh Christ. Those people will kill you if you screw with them. Why the hell did you go to them?" I started to cry, blurring my headlights on the curves. "I loved her so much," I choked out. "But she trusted you. I was just the little pest brother." His face worked. "Shit, no man. She was hella proud of you. Aggie scholarship and all that. She talked about you all the—" He broke off. By passing headlights, I saw tears glisten in his eyes. And I saw something else. His beard covered his chin and his jawline, but not his upper cheeks. Clean. I'd thought in Guthrie Park and wondered why. The beard had confused me, but the white scar was gone from his left cheek. Without thinking, I pressed the gas. In moments I was going over 50, rural mailboxes flashing past. I couldn't ask the question in my mind, "Who are you?" Instead I asked, "Why were you late? If you got there on time, you could have protected her." He groaned. "I was there. I tried to protect her." I glanced at him. He'd squeezed his eyes tight, fighting the tears streaming down his face. He started crying, Aldo said. Then he changed, as Travis changed now. My friend, my sister's best friend, changed into something I couldn't explain. I pressed the gas harder. If I went fast enough, maybe he wouldn't dare attack. I whipped around a curve, tires squalling. Claws sprang out to grip my dash. His growls laid a ghastly bass line beneath my shrieking tires. If he attacked me, or if I found the courage, I would slam my car's passenger side against one of the huge old hickories flashing by. Would it kill him? Even hurt him? Crazily, I thought of the times I'd considered having a silver-bladed knife made, just for this scene. This confrontation with my sister's killer. I came out of a curve half sideways and fought the car back into its lane. I knew shore road, but not at this speed. I glanced toward Travis. He sat braced in his seat, lips drawn back, jaws clenched. His voice was thick, guttural. Rick, please slow down. I shot past a westbound pickup at 80. You killed her. You got her killed. My own voice was tight, raised just over the road noise. He terrified me, but so did my speed. A tree appeared on the right, very near the road. I tried to twitch the wheel toward it, but my arms wouldn't obey, or obeyed a deeper command. I didn't hurt her, he growled. A voice from the pit. Another man killed her, on purpose. You gotta believe me. Now a ditch ran along the road's right side. I'd missed my chance with trees over there. Tall poles for high-tension lines were flashing by on the left, shining in moonlight, too far from the road. Then I remembered the bridge over Possum Walk Creek. A short stretch to accelerate, a quick twitch to the right, and a concrete post would tear off everything behind my right headlight. He must have seen my eyes change as the bridge came into sight. As I floored the gas, he leaped at me, roaring. My last hesitation overcome, I turned squarely toward the bridge pillar. One clawed hand snatched at the wheel, tearing a gash across my raised arm. The other grabbed the transmission lever and chunked it into neutral. The engine screamed, racing. For a frantic half-second we fought the wheel. I heard a hard bam and tearing sounds. Then we shot off the far end of the bridge and slid sideways into a chain-link fence. The car reared onto its side, and Travis fell on me. I couldn't move, pinned by his arms. I waited for the claws to rip into me, and waited. Are you done? Travis rumbled. If you are, we need to get out of here. Somebody'll call the cops. He pulled himself off of me, up into the passenger seat. Wedging himself there, he shoved his weight back and forth, rocking the car against the fence. After 3 or 4 well-timed shoves, the car toppled, whamming down onto 4 wheels. Amazingly, the engine was still running. By feel, not taking my eyes off him, I shifted into reverse, pulled away from the fence, then pulled forward to swing onto the pavement. He opened his door and stepped out. I'll find you, I said. You can't get. Don't be a dweeb, he said, startling me into silence. I'm just gonna check the car. He walked around. I heard, holy crap, followed by the creak of metal and crackle of plastic. Turn around, go back to the bridge. We gotta pick up your bumper before some poor dumbass runs over it. Hardly believing myself, I did as he said. My rear bumper lay half across the road. With arms unnaturally long, he picked it up, opened my rear door, and wedged it into my back seat. That's gonna cost you some. He climbed into the front, bending almost double to fit. Not a mark on the right side, until just behind the rear wheel. A foot further back, Uday missed the post completely. 6 inches forward, Uday lost the wheel. He pointed east. Turn around. Drive. I drove. I could never hurt you, Rick, he said. He shook his head. I didn't hurt Ginger either. She was safe, or should have been. Fresh tears in his eyes, he told me the true story of how Ginger died. I only interrupted once to exclaim, "You slept with Carrie White, just to find someone she knew." Yeah, I'm not proud of that. But I would have done worse to find that guy. When it was over, I should have had 1,000 questions, but I only had 3. When I saw you tonight, I thought you looked, well, peaceful. Is that why? Because you got the truth about Ginger? Peaceful? Oh man, I wish. But yeah, I feel better than I have for a long time. You haven't said, how do you change back? Start laughing? I guessed to him it was a chuckle. It sounded like a bulldozer breaking up pavement. I wish. No, it's what you said first. I gotta get peaceful. I have to let go of myself. That bulldozer sound again. It's as hard as letting myself cry. I'm too uptight, even when I ought to relax. I couldn't think of but one answer for that. I pulled into the Folk Dam parking lot, put the car in park, and walked around to his door. "Get out," I said. He frowned up at me, but then clambered out, standing up and up and up. I hugged him, something I hadn't done since we were kids. It was weirdly like being 10 years old again, when he was 12 and sprouting like a chinaberry tree. My head rested on his chest. "I've got you," I told him now, "just for a little while. Let me hold on to everything for you." "First," he cried. Then a car passed, and he gave a soundless laugh. "We look like a fine couple, I bet." And finally, I felt the tension go out of his back, out of his chest. "Stand back," he hissed. From a pace away, I watched him shrink to the Travis Mosley I knew. He drew a deep breath of the cold night air and grinned a familiar grin. Warm but shallow, he was already rebuilding his walls. I knew now they held a door for me, as they had for Ginger. I asked my last question. "Why were you at Second Baptist?" I already suspected the answer. I was following a woman. I think she's coterie, but I don't think she knows about me. She's a witch, I'm pretty sure, but not all the coterie are bad. I want information, and I think she'll talk to me. He jerked his head at the car. We climbed back in. You know I lost a month. By now, you can guess that's when this happened to me. When I became whatever the hell I am. Not a werewolf, even with those claws. All stretched out like that. You're about as cat-like as a blue heron. Were-giraffe? He laughed, a nice normal laugh. Let's stick with werewolf. The laugh stopped. That's when I was changed. And now I'm pretty sure who did it. The coterie made me a werewolf. We reached the Taylor Branch Bridge below the dam. He looked up at the glaring lights and the high concrete wall. And that makes the coterie the bastards that got Ginger killed. We drove south toward home, his face as hard as Folk Dam. Fourth story. We visited the cemetery on Werewolf Road. We were always told not to venture out on Werewolf Road late at night when we were children, but one night we were just too damn determined to know why the teenagers from our small town were so frightened by the unnerving place that we had to see for ourselves. I had my small backpack loaded with snacks, a flashlight with spare batteries, a flare gun with a can of bear spray, and attached to my backpack was my sleeping bag. The 4 of us gathered together behind my cousin's house, who lived just 2 houses down across the street, and together we all exchanged scary legends and stories we had heard about the road and the cemetery on it. I heard there's a woman in the trees who jumps on people's cars late at night. She sleeps on a mattress with her dead, rotting baby. Evan said with a morbid sense of pride in his voice. "That's baloney," my cousin Justin said, shaking his head. "I heard she was just drunk and that happened once. The baby wasn't dead. The police took it from her, though," he said in a matter-of-fact tone. "You guys ever hear about the dead puppy in the box my brother found in the cemetery?" I said aloud. The other three looked at me, their eyes widening with interest as I spoke up. He said he went up there alone one day around 2 years ago when we moved here. He said he was walking through the graveyard, and near one of the tombstones there was a purple box. He saw blood on the outside of the box and grabbed a stick to open it, and there was a dead puppy that someone sacrificed. He looked up and saw streamers in the trees and an area where it looked like there was a fire. For 4 adolescent boys with active imaginations, you could only picture how terrified we were. There would have been next to no possibility that we would venture out anywhere such as that alone. But together, it was a different story. We were all in this together, despite how frightening it was. "Oh, come on. He's just jacking with ya." Ronnie, the youngest of us 4, spouted. I could tell if he was lying, and believe me, he wasn't. He had a look on his face that makes me feel like he wasn't. "Are we gonna do this or not?" Justin said, seemingly irritated by the stories. We each shrugged and picked up our belongings, and next thing we knew, we were walking towards the woods that led to the legendary road on the other side. The leaves and sticks cracked beneath our feet as we stumbled around in the pitch-black summer night. Justin had his flashlight shining ahead of our group. The narrow beam shone the heavy thicket that surrounded us. In some places you could see, even in the absence of light, the silhouettes of fast food litter like styrofoam cups of various sizes and plastic bottles or discarded cans that were scattered about. I felt the crunch of an empty beer can under my foot. I cursed under my breath as I realized just how loud and inconvenient my misstep was. Evan turned around and shushed me as we continued walking. "Fuck off, Evan," I said in a stern but quiet voice. I raised my hand as he turned forward, the thought crossing my mind to smack the back of his head. I bit my bottom lip and considered how bad that could be for us if the wrong group of people noticed our presence. "Okay, I can see the road. We need to decide right now if we are going to drop our stuff off first and then continue, or if we're going to take everything," Justin said. I looked around at the flat, dry ground that was covered in leaves nearby. "That looks like a perfect area to set up camp," I said, pointing at the spot. We all 4 removed our bags as we walked over to the grounds I chose, setting them down. "Anything valuable any of you might need to grab before we go?" Justin asked. I ran to my bag and grabbed the bear spray, assuming it would be good just in case we ran into some trouble. Ronnie and Evan shook their heads and continued with him as he moved his flashlight from off our newly claimed campsite and headed for the cemetery on Werewolf Road. I quickly caught up to them as we continued. In the humid summer night, there wasn't a sound to be heard besides a barn owl that could be heard in a tree nearby, and our feet lightly moving across the earth. We reached the dirt road, and I raised my head and looked around as what sounded like something heavy fell through a mess of branches, perhaps a decrepit tree or a large animal. Whatever that was, it wasn't small. I heard Ronnie say. I looked over at him and was leaning over his bent knees, wiping his sweaty face off with his dark shirt. He raised up and shook it, attempting to cool off. We 4 sat in silence. The night now grew more ominous. We stared at the dirt road, and I now looked to the right, remembering the wooden bridge that led to the cemetery. "It's this way," I said. We continued walking. I turned around to notice the rest of the group behind me, Justin still holding the flashlight, but aiming it up in the trees rather than the very dark road ahead. "Justin, can I see the flashlight?" I asked. "Here you go," he said as he quickly stretched his arm out and held it out like the Olympic torch. We approached the wooden bridge. As we came closer, I looked out at the creek, where you could see a pile of dead hogs, perhaps 6 or more, on the creek bed. The stench from their rotting, bloated corpses fouled the air. On the bridge was a pentagram drawn out near the very center. It had been faded from the elements, but you could still see it fairly well. We gathered around it, not saying a thing aloud. "The cemetery is just up the road," I said. We continued across the bridge, and I noticed that Ronnie turned his head and looked back at the creek where the dead hogs were. "Did you guys see that? Or smell it at least?" We continued walking, not thinking too much about it. There could have been many reasons for that. Not every little thing had to be unusual, even to young boys who longed for excitement. As we got closer to the cemetery, we noticed a bright light coming from inside its fence. It was a fire. We rushed down the road, trying our best to stay low and keep quiet as we grew dangerously closer to the cemetery. We got off the road and made our way up a ditch, which led us into the woods that surrounded the cemetery fence line. As we lined up to peer through the fence, we were careful to stay low. Embers lingered around the blaze like fireflies in the cemetery landscape, and we watched as these beings that gathered around the fire. They weren't human. There hadn't been a chance they were human at all. They were beastly, savage creatures that were swift on all fours. When they were on the lookout, they stood on their hind legs and perched, exposing their ape-like chests and torsos. The rest of their bodies looked more canine, like a greyhound. Their faces were covered in heavy, beaked masks that looked similar to the surgeon makes worn during the Black Plague, but these were more of a ghastly sight on such already terrifying monsters. I knew we couldn't dare trespass on their fiery territory. I watched as one lurked near a tombstone and dug like a canine into the ground. I listened as we could hear what sounded like gurgling coming from the plot, dirt being thrown viciously behind the creature. The rest of the pack began to gurgle and click their mouths as they walked around the fire. 3 other creatures gathered near the burial plot where the first creature dug, and the other 3 stood on their hind legs and looked around. I watched as the creature that was now burrowed deep in the ground climbed out of the hole with a rotting arm in its mouth. It sat next to the others, arm between its 2 hands, sniffing. The others gurgled and sniffed in between chirps. Another creature crawled into the hole and came back to the surface with a dismembered leg in its mouth and carried it away from the rest of the group. Justin looked over at the rest of us with a face full of shock, and he spoke very hesitantly in an almost faint whisper, trying his best to control his breathing. "We've got to get the hell out of here. I don't know what those things are, but they aren't people. I say we leave our stuff at the campsite and get back to my place fast." The 4 of us backed away from the fence, and we got as close to the bottom of the ditch as we could. We knew that any little noise from us could be fatal. The sticky summer air attracted unrelenting mosquitoes that swarmed around our ears and our sweaty necks and arms. We tried for our lives to ignore the high-pitched buzz that rang in our ears as we crept towards the bridge. I heard a gurgling sound in a nearby tree overhead. It rattled and clicked, signaling the others to move in on us. I looked up to see it as, through its frightening mask that covered its disfigured face, it looked down on me with its black, dilated pupils as I felt the sweat collect in my eyes and the mosquitoes I refused to away at bite into my neck. The other 3 were frozen in place, staring at the creature as well. I smelled urine in the air from Ronnie, as he couldn't anymore hold his bladder in fear. I couldn't blame him. There wasn't a moment for ridicule or disparagement. The creature stared into our eyes, and I heard the fence line viciously rattle as the other creatures climbed and jumped it, closing in on our misfortunate, desperate souls. Justin spoke up. "Guys, any ideas?" I slowly reached into my pocket and felt for a lighter. In my other pocket was the big can of bear spray. We let them close in on us dangerously to our discomfort, but I knew this was an ample opportunity to quickly discharge as much of the can on them as I could while we still had a chance. I watched as the creatures fell on their backs, croaking and clicking their tongues with this very awful and loud scream that came out in between gurgles and rattles. They nervously clicked more after this. The creature in the tree appeared to fear jumping. It leapt in the opposite direction, scurrying near the cemetery fire. We quickly rushed across the bridge, we jumping into the creek near the dead hogs and trudging through the water. It was only 5 minutes or less to Justin's home. The time we counted down together, not allowing failure to escape the grip of such vile and heinous of creatures. We saw the porch light nearby as we entered into the neighborhood. It had been a welcome relief to know that we had arrived finally. As I reached Justin's patio under the floodlight, I took a moment to catch my breath. I turned my head to look around, and I realized I had been the only one who reached my cousin's backyard. I called out each of their names, but without success. I waited around 5 minutes when I saw the beam of Justin's flashlight shine into the backyard from over the fence. I watched as him and Evan and Ronnie boosted each other over his fence as I continued to walk over to them and asked them what exactly kept them so long. I watched them, and something seemed different about their demeanors. They each had a look in their eyes that unnerved me. Justin spoke up. "You left us behind. You didn't even let us catch up with you. What the hell were you thinking?" he said angrily. I walked in circles, looking up at the three of them as they stared at me with unequivocal disapproval nonetheless. After the three of them refused to talk to me that night, I finally decided to walk home. As I got to my room, I quickly stripped to my boxers and fell onto my bed. I woke up around 8:30 in the morning to my father calling out to me from his office, and he said, "Tyler, come in here right now." I walked into my father's office. I watched as he held his bald fist over his mouth, leaning back in his leather chair. He ran his other hand through his hair and looked at me. "Your cousin and your friends are missing. What happened last night?" I thought about it for a moment, but hesitated on giving a full disclosure. "We just hung out till early this morning, and then I came home around 1 o'clock this morning. They were there when I left." "Did you go anywhere with them? Or did they have somewhere they wanted to go?" He leaned forward. "The only place we went to was the cemetery on Werewolf Road." Fifth story. Werewolves are not what I expected. My name is Amish. I am a 21-year-old college student, living on the outskirts of city name omitted. My dad had bought this house ahead of time, planning for my college, and I was grateful for that. He had installed metal security screens on all the windows and door to prevent intruders from getting into the house since it was isolated, with the nearest neighbors being more than 3 miles away. There was a woods-like area, less than 100 meters from my house, and I often visited it with some of my college's friends. We started campfires, got stoned, and just chilled in the woods. We never encountered any wild animals, except maybe a wild dog or a monkey here or there, but nothing too threatening. Yesterday, my friends came over. It was my birthday. We got drunk, danced, ordered a shit ton of pizzas, and enjoyed ourselves. After the majority of my friends had left, and only my best friends remained, we decided that it'd be best if they slept over. At 1 a.m., we decided to go into the woods, start a campfire, and enjoy beer while playing Spin the Bottle and giving each other dares. We started off with stupid dares like DMINGXs and posting weird tweets, and since none of us were of the imaginative kind, we were having a really good time fooling around. Eventually, my friend Mike dared me to go into the woods and click a picture on the far end of the woods. I wasn't in the mood to get bit by a wild insect or to get chased by a wild dog and couldn't even think straight. So I asked Mike to give me some other dare and stop being silly. They all chuckled and imitated a chicken. "You aren't so tough after all, big guy, are you?" said Katie in between snickers. I was frustrated, Screw you guys. I whispered under my breath before getting up and walking into the woods. I had my phone on me, so I used its flashlight to navigate through the forest. While I was in the middle of the woods, surrounded by trees and bushes, I noticed motion in my peripheral vision. I looked straight towards the bush through which I noticed the movement and started walking towards it. I could not see a thing. As soon as I walked into the bush, I heard a low growl and the sounds of quick, heavy footsteps. I walked through the bushes but found nothing/no one. Yeah, super funny guys. I looked around and exclaimed in the darkness. Now that I look back at it, doing this while drunk wasn't the best idea, to be honest, since I would have grabbed the attention of all the creatures nearby. I dismissed it as a wild puppy or a bunny or something and continued walking deeper into the woods. I arrived at the end of woods and turned off my phone's flashlight, then took a selfie. I quickly snapped a few more photos before starting back to the campfire. It was 2:30 a.m. by now, and I was more than halfway through to my friends. I had this sudden urge to check out how the photos actually looked, so I unlocked my phone and looked through to the photos. To my horror, there was a mangled deer carcass hanging from a tree. Its eyes were slashed right out, blood poured from its stomach, or what remained of its stomach. Its back had a giant bit more, resembling that of a dog or a wolf. I threw up at the horrid sight. How could have I not noticed it? I thought to myself. I continued to walk towards the campfire, now getting both scared and desperate. Just before the campfire was in sight, I heard roaring and people crying out for help. When I connected the dots in my head, I came to a disturbing realization. I ran as fast as I could towards the sounds, only to see 3 of my friends' headless, mangled bodies around the campfire. All their bodies were mangled. I saw Mike running towards the house. Before I could even fully process what was happening, a bipedal wolf-like creature came sprinting down. It dug its claws in Mike's back. I heard him shriek before the creature put its jaws around his neck and snapped his neck clean in half. I closed my eyes and ran backwards, back into the woods. I couldn't watch the whole ordeal, and was pretty sure that the creature had noticed me. Because of the darkness, I could not make out any features of the creature except a long snout with giant fangs, and the pale green color of its skin. It stood almost at 9 feet tall, and had talon-like claws in both its hands. Something in my heart told me to run and climb a tree, since I knew damn well I could not outrun it. I quickly climbed up a tree and hid within its large leaves, peeking through them. I could see it pass by every couple of seconds, probably looking for me. At 4 a.m., I decided to climb down and run to my house since I hadn't seen it for a good 15 minutes. I took a deep breath and sprinted towards my house. My heart skipped a beat when I realized a pair of footsteps had followed me. I heard it growl and braces for impact. I knew it had lunges towards me. It jumped on top of me and let out a blood-curdling screech. I could now see its face clearly. It had clear blue eyes and grayish-green fur on its face. It looked like a wolf but had a much muscular frame. I felt suffocated under its weight. My life flashed before me. Babe, I closed my eyes, just hoping and praying it'd kill me in one swift blow. But then it got off me and roared. I stood up quickly to see another werewolf, charging towards the clear blue-eyed one. This other werewolf has glowing red eyes and white fur. It looked taller than the one trying to attack me, but was definitely lighter. They locked claw and bit down on each other. A purple liquid, what I assumed to be their blood, splattered everywhere. Their collision gave me enough time to run to my house. As soon as I entered, I noticed that the house was in ruins. The metal screens were broken and blood was smeared on the walls. I immediately dialed up the cops, but realized that I had no connectivity. It was weird since there was a mobile tower just next to my house. peeked through the window to see both the beasts were purposely damaging the mobile tower with their brute strength. They were a lot more intelligent than I initially thought. The white one looked towards me as it almost gave me a smirk. I escaped my house, laid low, and am currently in a small makeshift hut. Typing this out, the internet connectivity is almost non-existent, so I don't even know if this message will reach out to you or not. I will keep updating you guys. If I am alive, unfortunately my phone is going to die on me in a few minutes. I can hear their howls in the distance,